Welcome to Dimension 20 Demystified. This is a video where I'm going to go through an episode of Dimension 20 and break down the lessons we can learn as GMs and as players, and today we're tackling Katie Marovich's first session as a game master.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another thrilling season of Dimension 20 on a bus.
What?
We're on a bus this
You're an
time.
elf.
Is it Onibus? Like the elven name of the kingdom?
No, we're on a bus.
I love watching D&D players GM for the first time. One of my favorite campaigns was run by a first-time game master. It had some of the best D&D moments I've ever experienced. I made a whole video about Liam O'Brien's first live-streamed session and talked about how I prefer some elements of his style over Matt Mercer's, at least as techniques that I bring into my own games. And in the pantheon of great on-screen GMs, we must add Katie Marovich, because she really knows what she's doing.
I am your humble
That's just nerves, that's fine.
You already know them, you already love them. Brendan Lee Mulligan.
Hi.
Abria Iyengar.
Hi.
Jasmine Bueller.
Hello.
And we've got my favorite, no offense, Mark Mercer.
Hey, Mark here.
I love you, Mark.
And here's the first lesson of this video. You should offer to run a game for other game masters. Give them a chance to be players. A lot of game masters really never get a chance to be players, and as much as we like game mastering, it's also nice to just sit back and let somebody else run a game for you. It takes the pressure off of you for a week or a month and gives you an opportunity to refill the well creatively. This is the advantage of the format of something like Dimension 20, but it's similar to how we ran games in college. We'd run a campaign for one semester for about 13 weeks, so we'd be done before finals. And once that campaign was over, someone else would run a new game after the holidays or after the summer break. And we usually had a default GM, but it was rare that he ran both games in the same school year. Usually he ran a game in the fall, and then someone else ran another game in the spring. It's a much more forgiving schedule than running a weekly game for 3 years. But a lot of players are reluctant to run games, but don't be. Just pick up the ball, even for 1 week. Just run a one-shot and try something. And obviously in this case, Katie knew she was cooking, so this is not a one-shot, it's the start of a much bigger campaign. But obviously that's because she knows she had a really solid premise.
And let me set the scene.
Oh my God.
Christ.
On a bus.
I know Rick had nothing to do with that.
That looks incredible.
That's right, Rick Perry didn't have anything to do with making this bus. And that's okay. Look, I know it's sometimes daunting to look at shows like Dimension 20 or Critical Role and see these incredible pieces of terrain carefully crafted by some of the best artists in the business. The work Rick Perry does on Dimension 20 is astonishing, and the fact that he hasn't received an Emmy nomination is a crime. But this is a show that puts a lot of energy into making a product that's as visually exciting as possible for the audience at home. For your own games, you don't really need all the fancy maps you see on actual play shows. Just work with what you got. And the same with the miniatures, but we'll get there in a minute.
I guess it's time for a battle.
With who?
A battle.
Based on what?
Is the bus under attack?
Starting with a battle is a really fun way to open your session and give everyone a chance to explore their characters. These players seem particularly surprised, probably because most seasons of Dimension 20 start with this longer introduction where every character is introduced in their own little vignette where we really see what their life is like when they're at rest, and that's nice, I guess. But I kind of love starting with action. It gives your game a real James Bond, Indiana Jones, cold open vibe, which can help set the tone for your campaign.
You want to be Lint?
Oh.
Do you want to be a little army man? Do you want to be this little hat? Or do you want to be a blue M&M?
I'll be Hat.
When I moved to LA, I didn't have miniatures. My group in college had used the collection of 2 of our players, but when I moved further south, I didn't have access to those minis anymore. So I would slowly start building it up by going to gaming stores and buying little metal miniatures. And so by the time I got a D&D group going, I had some minis that my players could use to represent themselves. They weren't always perfect, but I had enough of a selection that most people could find something that was a close enough match to work for the game. But my goblins were just army men from a huge bag of them I got from my grandpa. And it worked fine. I mean, army men are huge compared to D&D miniatures, so they didn't do a great job representing scale, but they could still tell the players where all the goblins were located on the map, and that's really all they needed to do. I've heard of groups using anything they can get their hands on to represent monsters and NPCs. You can use dice, which I think is the most confusing option, since I can never remember whether someone rolled a die onto the map on accident or whether it represents a monster. But the advantage of using dice is that you can tick the die down whenever the monster takes damage, so they know which monsters have been hurt just by looking at them. Some people use candy at the table, so when a monster is slain, you can just eat the candy to mark your victory. But the point is, this is fantastic. You don't need fancy minis as long as your players have something they can use at the table.
And there you are. A hat for your troubles, sir.
Now, in case you don't know and you're new here, I do another series where I talk about Critical Role, and I break down the lessons we can learn and how we can model what they do well in our own campaigns. And that show is pretty famous for the fact that all the cast members are voice actors. But I haven't really discussed that yet as something we can learn from and apply to our own games because, quite frankly, I think it's unnecessary to do voices in order to play D&D well. And if we imply you have to do voices to play D&D, well, then we're comparing ourselves to literal voice actors, and that's not going to give you a good sense of what it's actually going to be like to start doing voices for the first time. But I definitely want to give Katie credit for doing voices in her game and really going for it, even though she's not a trained voice actor and she knows she'll get some more scrutiny than someone like Mark Mercer would. Sure, at first it seems like the cast is a little surprised and maybe a little uncomfortable. There's some snickering when she launches into a character voice, and I think that kind of always happens when you're running for a new group and you do voices for the first time. These are your friends and they only know you as someone who talks like you with your own voice. So the first time they hear you adopt the voice of an elf or a barmaid or whatever, there's a part of their brain that's going to make them self-conscious because they'll be reminded that what you're all doing is a little silly. But you have to just push through it and understand that everyone will be a little silly about it at first, but they're your friends. They're going to understand that you're not a trained voice actor, you're just doing your best, and just push through and keep doing voices that you're comfortable with. And eventually, your players will settle into it and won't feel as self-conscious.
Which one?
It would be mine pleasure to accept this gracious
And yes, there you are, fair maiden.
Thank you. There's food in this.
That's exactly what Mark does. He doesn't shift his voice as wildly as Katie does, which is fine. We all have our limits. Not everyone has the gift for voice acting like Katie does, but I still want to give him credit for embracing the moment and not letting himself feel self-conscious. Way to go, Mark.
I do have sandwiches if someone would like
Now, this is great DMing, and I should do this.
You brought sandwiches?
Look, I don't want to criticize Katie, especially her first time out, but I think this sets a bad example for GMs watching the show and potentially gives players unreasonable expectations. I have made food for my players before. I recently made this goblin cake for my party. It was really fun to try to figure out how to do that. But for every other game we've played together, I just let the other players handle the food. Sometimes they'll spend a bunch of time making really elaborate meals, and sometimes the meals will even be taken from fantasy cookbooks, so it feels more on brand. And other times we just order pizza. I mean, our pizza place is called Lucifer's, so it's still thematically connected to the game since we all know D&D is secretly demonic, hail Satan. But still, the point is, no, Brennan, you shouldn't do this at your own tables because the GM already has a lot on their plate. If you want to bring snacks, fair enough, go for it. But I think the GM already has so many responsibilities, it's frankly unreasonable to also make them in charge of feeding everyone. Again, it's completely fine. If Katie just wanted to bring some sandwiches, she's doing absolutely nothing wrong here. But I just want to make sure you don't feel pressured to do the same thing just because you saw somebody do it on Dimension 20.
And then I have dice for you.
Powered by the apocalypse?
Just sixes.
What are we?
Honestly, I'm here for it.
Do you have any 20-sided dice?
I don't know what you're saying. It's like you're speaking a different language.
If you're using Dungeons
cheating?
and Dragons as a game system, we're going to have a hard time doing that without 20-sided dice.
I actually agree.
It could be like a homebrew hack.
And I actually love that.
Why are you helping?
Matt, don't help.
Okay, let's talk about the dice system. A pretty common and I think a reasonable critique of Dimension 20 is that they very rarely deviate from the biggest system in the world, Dungeons and Dragons. And considering that they have one of the biggest platforms in the industry, it would be really nice for them to branch out more often and actually explore other systems. We've seen them dip into other games every once in a while, but clearly Katie didn't want to run traditional D20 fantasy. She's using a D6 system instead. And considering that D6s are the most common dice, the ones you can find in just about any board game, weirdly I think D6 systems are a little bit more approachable for most players. And she does a good job of not overloading them with the rules. She's only focused on giving them the rules they need to know right now in order to understand what they need to do next. I think maybe these game masters are just so used to D&D that it was a hard adjustment for them.
Air.
If you're not aware, Katie is referencing the way that Matt and Brennan and Abria open their games when they play for each other. When Brennan came over to Critical Role to run EXU Calamity, he opened the first episode with a single word: fire. When Matt returned the favor by coming over to run Dimension 20 to run the Ravening War, he opened his first episode with the word water, which wasn't just a fun callback joke, but also a reference to the fact that fire is as dangerous to humans, or, elves and dwarves or whatever, as water is to the people of the candy world that the Ravening War takes place in. When Abria ran the Dimension 20 series Burrow's End, where the players were all rabbits and voles and raccoons, she opened with the word Earth, since that's the environment they live in. And obviously, Earth can be dangerous, but it's also their habitat. It's where they live. But Katie manages to basically split the uprights and find a way to use air in a way where it's not just something we need in order to live and is our environment, like Abria did with Earth, but it's also somehow harmful to us, like fire and water in those examples. And she managed this by setting the game in Los Angeles, California. Sometimes it really does feel like you're being attacked by the air itself, with the amount of smog and pollution we have in LA. And yet, during the summer, you truly cannot survive if you don't have access to air conditioning. So you need it to live, but it's also dangerous. Also, what's in the tires of a bus? Air. Katie's working with some really next level stuff here. It's genuinely impressive.
I'll paint the scene. North Hollywood, in an apartment building.
I thought we were on a bus.
About to get on a bus.
Okay.
The screech of tires.
Is this what we sound like?
It might be.
How much is this ride? $1.25.
How much money do we have as characters?
Yeah.
So here, it really seems like Katie realized that her players wanted something more in line with what they're used to in the games they typically run on this channel. They wanted the introduction to feel a little bit more cinematic, and Katie essentially pivots her introduction to incorporate something they're more used to, a little bit more of a prologue establishing the process of boarding the bus. Again, fantastic move. We all have these lofty ideas of what specific kinds of stories we want to tell when we run games, but Katie here has realized something that I think a lot of game masters take a long time to figure out. You're not just running a game for yourself, you're running it for your friends. She saw that her players weren't as interested in jumping right into combat without at least a little bit of prologue to make them more immersed in the scene and in the world of the game. So she pivoted. She essentially set aside her own artistic vision in order to incorporate her players' wishes for the campaign. That's why I think Katie is such a fantastic game master. She understands why we run these games. They are gifts to our players.
Am I literally a hat?
You're a hat.
Great. I'm carried onto the bus by a man. I don't pay for anything.
Okay, that's a good point. And excellent. So we are on a bus.
What do you mean excellent? What do you mean excellent?
Fantastic. So we are actually on a bus.
Look, we've all been there. A player points out some sort of plot hole or logical inconsistency in our setup, and we realize that there's something that we just told our players that doesn't make sense. At least not perfect sense. And when our players point it out, we have a choice. We can either stick to our guns and try to force the scene we plan to still play out the same way at the table, even when there's a little bit of a logic gap there, or we can go with the flow. We can realize that the whole point of playing these games at all is to tell a compelling story. And so when your players point out something that would logically happen and it doesn't line up with what you expected or thought would happen, it's sometimes beneficial to just say, oh, good point. Okay, this is not what I had planned, but you're making an argument. It's excellently made. This is logically what would happen in that scenario, so let's roll with that instead. It is perfectly fine to just admit your mistakes as a game master, because our goal here is to embrace the unpredictable nature of telling a story with your friends. Sometimes it means they're going to point out some things that had not occurred to us. You can either dig your heels in, or you can say, good point, let's do that, and then move on to the next beat of the story.
Our mission is to get from North Hollywood to LAX.
This is longer season, right?
You're going to roll your dice. We have a lot of dice.
They're not the right ones.
So just roll those.
For what? What are you rolling for?
You go first. Can you roll for me?
For what?
Roll 1d6.
He's rolling initiative. This is an.
You just said he goes first. That you don't need initiative if he's going first.
You know what? Give me a creativity roll, and I'll see how creative you are.
5.
This is our first glimpse into actually seeing the system in action, and here we learn that there's a creativity roll. I think one of the things people struggle with when they try to figure out how to convert something like D&D into a modern setting is figuring out what sorts of skills or abilities would actually make sense for these characters. Why would your character, a human being from our world living in presumably suburban or urban America, have proficiency with longswords or skill points in survival? You can absolutely come up with a justification that makes sense, but sometimes the problem is that you actually need to adapt the system a little bit more to fit with the setting you're using. And that means finding some way to represent the actual challenges you face in that world. In a game like D&D, the most valuable skills you might need are things like fighting monsters, learning magic, perception and sleight of hand to navigate a dungeon and deal with traps. But in Los Angeles, a far more useful resource or skill is creativity. Again, just some really good work from Katie there to make the system thematically represent the setting of the game.
6.
Good news, everyone. That hits.
It's what?
You destroyed the bus.
What?
I thought we
Gone.
were trying to drive the bus.
First episode of Dimension 20 on a bus, we destroy the bus in the
The
first
bus is
10
gone.
minutes.
This is a really clever move from Katie. Obviously, if they're only on a bus for the entire campaign, that's going to be somewhat limiting, and it's also essentially going to make travel too convenient for the party. This is something we talk about in D&D all the time, but it actually is really difficult to make travel feel important in the game and not just like this obligation we have to get through to get to the exciting bits. So I actually love this as the inciting incident for the campaign. The plan was to travel on a bus for the rest of the campaign, but unfortunately, now you don't have that convenience that you expected, which raises the stakes for the rest of the campaign. A trip that was supposed to take an hour can last a good deal longer, and you have to interact with more stops along the way. This is a classic storytelling technique. This goes all the way back to the Odyssey, where something essentially goes wrong with your journey, and now you have to go on this much longer quest to try to get to your destination, facing all these challenges that are going to truly test you along the way. And I love to see whenever game masters invoke these classic literary themes in their games. Excellent work.
I want to be supportive of you and your effort. You got a whole elf getup that had to take time.
It did. It took several hours.
There's another video I made on this channel quite a long time ago that has gotten quite a lot of views, where I was critical, no pun intended, of a player in an RPG for wearing costume pieces at the game table. I still get comments about it to this day, every week, people being like, I don't understand your problem with the vest. What's wrong with dressing like your character? You're just nitpicking. It's ultimately just a point I didn't make well in the video, and I clarified my position in another video where I admitted, yeah, I was nitpicking. I didn't like other stuff that player was doing at the table, and so even something that shouldn't have mattered, like wearing a simple costume piece, just got under my skin because that player was getting under my skin. And this is the perfect counterpoint to that. The fact that Katie wears this whole elf attire for the session doesn't bother me at all because she's running one of the best games of Dungeons & Dragons I've ever seen. So just for the record, for the people who missed it in my other video, there's absolutely nothing wrong with dressing in character, even when nobody else at the table is doing so. As long as your other players like you and like hanging out with you, that's the really important thing. The reason that other player's vest bothered me is because that player was doing a lot of stuff at the table that I found frustrating and that I wouldn't want someone to do at my own table. The vest wasn't really one of them, it caught astray. But here, Katie is knocking it out of the park, so nothing she's doing bothers me. It's fantastic.
You have an awesome responsibility. You are the horizontal and the vertical. You are the environment and all events. Can you make me understand how a hat did something that was rolling a 5 and a bus is gone? I can't imagine what happened.
Yeah, and we'll get into that next week.
No.
Why?
I mean, it's efficient if you think about like the production.
Stop helping!
Like I mentioned earlier, there are going to be times when your players have questions for you that you might not necessarily have an answer for. And so sometimes it's better to just turn that question into a cliffhanger, to tease them for the next session and leave them wanting more. For example, in one of the last games I ran for my group, one of the players got bitten by a werewolf and contracted the curse of lycanthropy. So of course the players want to try to figure out how they can cure it. And as somebody who hates the idea of remove curse being able to solve this problem, I wanted there to be some other more interesting answer. But I couldn't think of anything in the moment. But thankfully, it was also just about time to wrap up the game anyway, so I essentially used the idea of trying to figure out a werewolf cure as a cliffhanger. They asked, how can we cure our ranger? And I replied basically, we'll find out next time. And again, I've been running games for 15 years. I spend a lot of time talking about lessons we can learn from movies and TV shows and making videos about it. I think a lot about dramatic timing and storytelling and narrative tension. This is Katie's first session, and she nailed it on her first try. So that's why I'm so impressed with this game. But let's be honest, as much praise as I have for the way Katie ran this game, it's not a perfect session. There's kind of a problem that we have to address.
Someone took Intrepid Heroes?
8 years ago.
All right. I'm gonna be honest, it's hard to hear with these ears.
They're behind your normal ears. This does hurt more than I expected it.
Yeah.
Where's the air? In context of what? What's it doing? How does it connect to us in our emotional journey? Do we experience the air? Who are we? Some of us are lint.
As we make our way into Los Angeles, California.
As a piece of lint, do I have like a natural affinity for the landscape of Los Angeles?
Okay, you're really
You're
trying.
you're
sorry.
trying to believe in
I'm
this
sorry,
so
yeah.
hard.
Okay, I got a 2.
You needed a 6, so
What is the dice system of the game?
Are we abandoned on the freeway now without a bus?
Matt can't help himself but help you narrate this into making sense.
well, that's everything. We'll see you next time on another exciting episode of Dimension 20 on a bus.
There's no bus anymore.
Look, nobody likes having a problem player at the table, but it can happen. And I've especially run into this problem when running for people who are typically dungeon masters, especially the ones who think of themselves as the forever DMs. Because sometimes they have a hard time giving up their ideas of how they think the game should be run. Let's be clear, Brennan is not backseat GMing, he's not making rulings on Katie's behalf, but he is definitely struggling to get into her style. And in a way, that's a much harder problem to solve. If somebody's just having a hard time stopping themselves from overly describing things or telling other players what they can or can't do, you can take them aside and remind them that you're the game master and not them. But Brennan is just having a really hard time adjusting to Katie's style, and that can be a much harder situation to resolve, because he either just needs to adjust to the style of the game that she's running, or it might fall to him to just realize that he's not going to be able to make that adjustment, and that means it's time to find another table.
Effective immediately, I will no longer be with Dropout.tv. As of today, I have dedicated myself to the craft and profession of making custom shoes for American Girl dolls. Ah, this is me!
Oh, okay. Yeah, it seems like he realized he just wasn't a good fit for that table anymore. Problem solved, I guess. I hope he lands on his feet and that his business of making shoes for American Girl dolls ultimately pans out and does well for him.
Well, critters, let's bring to the stage the GM for Campaign 4, Brennan Lee Mulligan.
Oh, well, that's embarrassing, but I'm sure he'll do fine. And there you have it, my first bonus Demystified video of the year.
This is not what I meant.
What do you mean? You said I needed to make a Demystified video every week. You wanted me to talk about a one-shot and see what lessons we could learn from it. Is that not what I did in this video? I actually do have a bunch of bonus Demystified videos that were commissioned by my patrons where I'm going to talk about some Critical Role one-shots that are not part of the main campaign storyline. We are going to do some real ones soon. But I just couldn't resist. I knew this one was going to be way too much fun to talk about. Thank you so much for watching. Next week, we're going to do episode 81 of Critical Role of the Vox Machina campaign, but I'm also working on a video that should be out before then, talking about what we've learned about Campaign 4 of Critical Role specifically. Really, we're talking about the fact that they're using D&D 2024 instead of Daggerheart. I have a lot of conflicting thoughts about that, so look for that video next week. Plus more videos about Daggerheart coming soon. I still have a lot more to say about that game, so make sure you're subscribed so you can keep up with everything I've got going on. If you want to help support the channel financially, please consider checking out my Patreon. I would really appreciate that. But if that's not something you're able to do right now, then please just consider sharing this video with a friend. It seems like right now YouTube's algorithm is a lot more likely to promote my videos if you share them with other people. At least that's my understanding. I don't really totally understand what's happening with the algorithm right now. Hey, Oddwick, you're an algorithm wizard. Can you tell us what's going on with the algorithm, what the recent changes mean? He's still upset he's not talking to me. Well, anyway, if you can share this video with someone you think will get a kick out of it, I would really appreciate it. And click right here to check out my recent video about Daggerheart's armor and health systems, and exploring how those mechanics represent the reality of the world of the game. That was a really fun topic to dive into. Until next time, play fair, and have fun.